My former coworker broke into my childhood home, stole my therapy records, and sent fake breakdown footage to my boss. When I asked her why, she smiled and said, "Because you're the most rewarding target I've ever had." I stayed silent. That was 4 months ago. This morning, she was sitting alone in the back row of a conference on psychological abuse, taking notes. I'd been working at this tech company for 5 years, watching promotions flow like water to anyone who could produce tears on command. My boss Ruben ran our meetings like he was auditioning extras for a Nicholas Sparks movie, and the only currency that mattered was liquid emotion dripping down your face. The pattern hit me like a wet fish to the face during Evangeline's quarterly review. She presented mediocre sales numbers, then burst into tears about a paper jam that had emotionally devastated her workflow. Ruben practically threw a senior VP title at her like he was making it rain at a strip club. Jasper sobbed over a typo in an email, claimed it represented his fear of imperfection, and scored himself a corner office bigger than my apartment. Meanwhile, I sat in my cubicle like a cactus at a water park, producing actual results but zero tears. My sales numbers looked like a rocket ship to the moon, but my tear ducts were drier than a conversation about tax law. After watching Karen weep her way to director of operations by crying about the office coffee maker's abandonment issues, I decided to crack this emotional code. I spent weeks preparing for my performance, watching every sad movie Netflix had to offer until my recommended feed looked like a therapist's nightmare. I practiced crying in the mirror until my reflection started charging me for therapy sessions. The secret weapon came from my roommate's taco night leftovers, a packet of ghost pepper hot sauce that could make a stone statue weep. I tucked it in my pocket like a tiny nuclear weapon of manufactured emotion. My quarterly review arrived like Judgment Day. I delivered a presentation so beautiful it could have made spreadsheets fall in love. Profits up 300%, customer retention through the roof, innovations that would make Steve Jobs jealous, if he could still feel jealousy. Then came time for the waterworks. I reached into my pocket, fingered that hot sauce packet like it was the One Ring, and subtly dabbed it under my eyes. The effect was instantaneous. Tears cascaded down my face like Niagara Falls having an emotional breakdown. I sobbed over customer satisfaction scores like they were orphaned puppies in the rain. Ruben's eyes lit up brighter than a Christmas tree at a rave. He leaned forward, drinking in my tears. The other executives nodded appreciatively, scribbling notes that probably said things like, "Finally showing leadership potential," and "Tears indicate executive material." But karma has a sense of humor darker than my coffee addiction. Mid-sob, the hot sauce packet slipped from my pocket like a confession falling from a guilty conscience. The silence that followed was so thick you could have spread it on toast and choked on it. Ruben stared at the splatter, then at me, then at the tears still streaming down my face from the fire assault on my eyeballs. My face looked like a tomato that had just run a marathon through a blender. Then, the absurdity of it all hit me. Here I stood, chemically burning my corneas for a promotion at a company that measured success in milliliters of sadness. My coworkers clutched their tissues like life preservers on the Titanic, and I was the weirdo for having functional tear ducts and actual skills. Ruben's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine made of feelings. He asked if I'd faked my tears, his voice cracking like a teenage boy asking someone to prom. I told him they were as real as the burning sensation currently trying to melt my face off. He responded that authenticity was crucial, but the source of tears mattered. They needed to come from genuine workplace emotions, not Mexican chemical warfare. That's when something snapped in me like a glow stick of rebellion. I asked him point blank if he only promoted people who cried. He clutched his chest like I'd just suggested the earth was flat and the moon was made of cheese. He launched into a speech about how tears showed vulnerability, commitment, and leadership potential, his own eyes welling up as he spoke, probably angling for a promotion from the board of directors. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ruben was literally crying about the importance of crying, but I had an ace up my sleeve better than hot sauce. I'd been documenting every tearful promotion like a wildlife photographer capturing rare species of corporate insanity, videos of grown adults sobbing over printer toner, executives weeping about fonts, managers crying over cafeteria menu changes. I had it all. The real kicker came when I dug into Ruben and discovered his ex-wife was a therapist who'd written her dissertation on emotional manipulation in corporate settings. Their divorce papers included a clause about him seeking treatment for his pathological need to create therapeutic environments in inappropriate settings. The Department of Labor found that particularly interesting when I forwarded them my collection. Turns out, running a company based on who cries the most violates more employment laws than a sweatshop run by sociopaths. Ruben tried to cry his way out of it, but the investigators were immune to his tears, probably because they dealt with actual workplace violations, not performance art. I thought it was over until my new boss pulled me aside yesterday. She said she'd gotten a call from someone claiming I'd emotionally sabotaged my previous workplace and had video evidence of me attacking company culture. The caller ID showed my old company's number, but the voice on the recording wasn't Ruben's. It was someone I'd never expected, someone who'd cried their way to the very top. The voice on the recording made my blood freeze like someone had replaced it with antifreeze. Sarah's office suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in as I recognized that honeyed tone beneath the digital distortion. Evangeline, my former colleague who'd sobbed her way to senior VP over a paper jam, was now orchestrating something far more sinister than workplace tears. My phone buzzed. Mom's number flashed on the screen, but something felt wrong. The timing was too perfect, too orchestrated. I answered while Sarah watched me with concern etched across her face like a roadmap of worry. Mom's voice came through warm and confused. She told me about Evangeline's visit earlier that day, how my former colleague had shown up with homemade soup and genuine concern for my well-being. The words hit me like physical blows. Evangeline had invaded my childhood home, the one place I thought was safe from corporate madness. I excused myself from Sarah's office and raced to the parking garage, my footsteps echoing off concrete like a countdown to disaster. Mom continued talking about how lovely Evangeline seemed, how worried she was about me, how she'd stayed for tea and looked through old photo albums. My hands shook as I fumbled for my car keys. The drive to my childhood home blurred past in a haze of growing dread. I found Mom in the kitchen, sorting through papers Evangeline had helpfully organized. Post-it notes in Evangeline's handwriting decorated various documents, each one subtly questioning my mental state. One on my high school report card read, "Early signs of instability." Another on a childhood photo noted, "Concerning isolation patterns." Family photos were missing from albums, gaps like pulled teeth in what used to be complete memories. Mom seemed oblivious to the violation, still chattering about what a caring colleague I had. She'd even given Evangeline my old therapy records from college, thinking she was helping a concerned friend understand my recent struggles. Back at Sarah's office an hour later, I discovered the full scope of Evangeline's plan. Sarah pulled up a video on her computer, her expression grim. The footage showed me during what looked like a mental breakdown, but I recognized the clever editing. Evangeline had spliced together moments from different meetings, interwoven with audio from therapy sessions I didn't even know had been recorded. The timestamp showed she'd been collecting this material for 6 months. 6 months of planning, recording, manipulating. This wasn't just about workplace rivalry anymore. This was psychological warfare with preparation that would make military strategists jealous. Sarah leaned back in her chair, chair, studying me carefully. She explained that Evangeline had sent this video along with an ultimatum. Either I returned to my old company as her subordinate in something called the Authentic Leadership Program, or she'd ensure I never worked in tech again. The threat wasn't subtle. It was a sledgehammer wrapped in corporate speak. I pulled out my phone to respond, to tell Evangeline exactly where she could shove her ultimatum. But before I could type a word, notifications exploded across my screen. 3 of our biggest clients had just received the video from what appeared to be our company email domain. The messages portrayed me as an unstable liability who'd manipulated my way into my current position. My LinkedIn started pinging like a slot machine hitting jackpot. 47 new endorsements for emotional instability from accounts created within the last hour. Each profile had a generic photo and suspiciously similar descriptions. Evangeline wasn't just attacking, she was carpet bombing my professional reputation. The drive home felt like navigating through a minefield of notifications, each ping another piece of my career potentially exploding. I found my roommate Marcus in our apartment, but he wasn't alone. His new girlfriend Jenna sat on our couch, perfectly positioned to see me enter. She introduced herself with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, mentioning she worked at a leadership consulting firm. The casual way she dropped that she'd heard about the situation at your old company set off every alarm bell in my head. Her phone rested on the coffee table, camera side up, angled perfectly to capture our interaction. Well, nothing says healthy workplace environment quite like measuring success by who can produce the most tears per quarter. I'm surprised they didn't install tear collection buckets under everyone's desks for performance metrics. I excused myself to my room, but the nightmare followed me there. Our company Slack had erupted into chaos. Screenshots of my meltdown video spread through channels like wildfire. Coworkers who'd respected me that morning now questioned my stability in barely concealed whispers, disguised as concerned messages. The real gut punch came when I traced the source. Connor from IT had given Evangeline access to our internal channels. Connor, who I'd helped train, who I'd recommended for promotion, had handed her the keys to my professional destruction. My elderly neighbor knocked on my door, concerned about a safety inspector who'd entered my apartment that afternoon while I was at work. She'd thought it strange, but assumed I'd scheduled it. The security footage she'd saved on her phone showed a man in a generic uniform, but I recognized the build and gait. It was the same private investigator who'd tailed me last month, the one I dismissed as paranoia. Sitting on my bed, surrounded by the wreckage of my day, I remembered something. Months ago, I'd secretly recorded one of Evangeline's vulnerability circles at the old company. My phone still held those files, buried in a folder I'd labeled tax documents out of habit. I played the recordings, and Evangeline's voice filled my room. She coached employees on manufacturing trauma stories, teaching them to cry on cue, to invent dead siblings and dying parents for sympathy. One employee's voice cracked as he admitted he'd been lying about his brother's death for 3 months because Evangeline insisted it showed leadership through vulnerability. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just 5 words that made my stomach drop. Check your mother's Facebook. The photos were already spreading across her timeline. Evangeline posed with my mom like they were old friends. Captions positioning herself as my concerned mentor, trying to help during my difficult time. Comments poured in from mom's book club friends, praising Evangeline's dedication and expressing worry about me. The next few days blurred together in a haze of escalating attacks. Marcus's girlfriend Jenna had moved in temporarily after a convenient apartment flood. She turned every dinner into an interrogation, asking probing questions about my mental health history while pretending to be supportive. Her questions were too specific, too targeted, like she had a checklist to complete. I started researching Evangeline's background and discovered her authentic leadership certification came from an online course she'd created herself. She'd plagiarized entire sections from established leadership frameworks, repackaging them with toxic additions about emotional transparency and vulnerability metrics. She sold this garbage for $2,000 per person to desperate middle managers. 3 major contracts canceled within a week. Each client cited concerns about my stability after receiving anonymous wellness checks. Our company's revenue dropped 30% in 5 days, and guess whose fault it was according to the whisper network Evangeline had cultivated. The breaking point came during a team meeting. Connor accidentally projected my edited breakdown video instead of the quarterly reports. I watched my coworkers' faces change, trust evaporating like morning dew under a blowtorch. They exchanged glances that spoke volumes, the kind that said, maybe the rumors are true. Our HR director suggested I take a wellness leave for my own good. Her sympathy felt rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. I did some digging and discovered she'd worked with Evangeline 5 years ago at a different company. The pattern was becoming clear as broken glass. Evangeline ran a private Facebook group called Authentic Leaders in Action with over 400 members. They shared employees' personal information like trading cards, discussing management strategies for difficult personalities. My name appeared in 17 different threads, each one documenting a new way to undermine my credibility. I noticed a tiny lens reflection in my office ventilation grate during a video call. Security found a hidden camera streaming to a cloud account none of us could trace. The police said without proof of who placed it, their hands were tied tighter than a Boy Scout's practice knots. Beth, a junior colleague I'd mentored, pulled me aside after catching Evangeline leaving my therapist's building. My therapy appointment times had been in my hacked calendar, and Evangeline had apparently been scheduling her visits to overlap. The violation of privacy made my skin crawl like it was trying to escape my body. The pattern finally crystallized when I connected with other victims. Evangeline had destroyed careers at 4 companies over 3 years, always targeting people who documented toxic leadership. She had a system, a methodology refined through repetition. First came workplace undermining, then family infiltration, then mental health attacks designed to force an actual breakdown she could point to as justification. Karen met me at a coffee shop before dawn, looking over her shoulder like a spy in a bad movie. She revealed that Evangeline forced her to attend my mother's book club to gather information. The price of refusal was career destruction, and Karen had a daughter to support. A former colleague created a private email list for Evangeline's victims. 7 people shared stories that could have been carbon copies of mine with different names. One had changed their name and moved states to escape the harassment. Another still couldn't hold a job 3 years later because Evangeline's network would sabotage any opportunity. Small victories felt huge in this war of attrition. When my therapist threatened legal action over the stolen recordings, Evangeline's reach temporarily retreated, but the win just enraged her more, like throwing water on a grease fire. Then came the 2 a.m. knock that changed everything. Jasper stood at my door, blood seeping through his shirt from self-inflicted cuts. His words came out in broken sobs. Evangeline had made him do it for authenticity in a board presentation. She'd convinced him that real pain showed real leadership commitment. The cuts were strategic, placed where they'd be visible but not dangerous. Choreographed self-harm for corporate advancement. I drove him to the emergency room, his blood staining my car seats like evidence of how far this had gone. As doctors stitched him up, Jasper told me about others who'd hurt themselves for Evangeline's approval. She'd created a cult of manufactured trauma, turning vulnerability into a weapon that cut both ways. The hospital's fluorescent lights made everything look sickly green as I sat in the waiting room, processing what Jasper had revealed. My phone vibrated with a Facebook notification. Evangeline Evangeline had befriended my uncle on the platform, the one who'd been sober for 5 years after nearly losing everything to alcohol. Her friend request came with a message about organizing a family intervention for my concerning behavior. I scrolled through her recent activity and found she'd already invited him to a bar downtown to discuss family concerns. My hands trembled as I typed a warning message, but his response came back confused and defensive. Evangeline had already planted seeds of doubt about my mental state. The pattern from other victims' stories was playing out exactly as they'd warned. First the workplace attacks, then family infiltration, followed by coordinated mental health assaults designed to create the breakdown she'd later point to as proof. I was watching my life become a case study in corporate psychological warfare. My pharmacy called the next morning. The technician mentioned a woman had been asking detailed questions about my prescriptions, claiming to be conducting a workplace wellness assessment. She'd wanted to know about dosages, refill dates, and whether I'd been compliant with my medication schedule. The technician had refused to share information, but the attempt itself sent chills down my spine. Mom called that afternoon, her voice wavering with confusion. Evangeline had shown her edited footage of me at work, claiming I'd had an argument that concerned my colleagues. Mom said it didn't look like me in the video, but Evangeline had insisted she should be worried about my stability. The doubt in Mom's voice cut deeper than any professional setback. I realized I needed to fight back systematically. I installed security cameras in my apartment, began recording every interaction on my phone, and created encrypted backups stored across multiple cloud services. If Evangeline wanted to play the evidence game, I'd document every single move she made. The next escalation came at 3 a.m. when police arrived for a wellness check. Someone identifying as my therapist had called claiming I was in immediate danger. The officers quickly realized the call was false when I provided my actual therapist's contact information, who confirmed no such concern existed, but the damage was done. My neighbors now looked at me differently, wondering what kind of crisis had brought police to our building in the middle of the night. A coffee shop owner whose daughter Evangeline had destroyed at a previous company reached out through the victim network. She offered me a safe space to work, sharing how Evangeline had driven her daughter to attempt sewer slide through similar tactics. The owner installed a security system specifically to protect people like us from surveillance. Word came through the network that a former employee of a private investigation firm had seen Evangeline's name on invoices. She'd hired them to investigate psychological pressure points on multiple targets. The employee had quit after realizing they were being used to destroy innocent people's lives. Dr. Patricia Chen, a psychologist who'd published papers on corporate abuse, couldn't discuss Evangeline directly due to confidentiality. So her pharmacy is getting calls about her medications? That's such a specific thing to target. I wonder how Evangeline even knew which pharmacy to call, or what made her think of going after someone's prescription information like that. But she mentioned her recent research on corporate psychopaths who weaponize therapy language to control and destroy others. The description matched Evangeline's methods perfectly. I decided against public confrontation, instead meticulously documenting the pattern of escalation. I created detailed timelines showing how Evangeline's behavior intensified across multiple victims, demonstrating a clear methodology of destruction. Sarah noticed my strategic approach during our meetings, commenting on how I was building an airtight case. Evangeline set a deadline through an intermediary, returned to the old company as her subordinate by month's end, or she'd release my complete psychiatric history to an industry newsletter. The medical information she'd somehow accessed included therapy notes from my college years, deeply personal information never meant for public consumption. Beth glimpsed something significant during a meeting with Evangeline. She later accessed Evangeline's digital calendar, where she discovered a rating system for management victories. Each destroyed employee was listed with initials and scored on difficulty. My initials appeared with the note, most challenging, rewarding target to date. During an investor call, technical difficulties prevented Evangeline from playing her usual victim role. Without her prepared emotional performance, her controlling nature showed through. She snapped at subordinates and made demands that revealed her true personality. One investor's daughter had been a previous victim, and he recognized the behavior pattern immediately. Evangeline offered me $50,000 to sign an NDA and disappear from the tech industry. When I refused, she escalated by calling my ex-partner with false allegations about abusive behavior during our relationship. My ex saw through the manipulation, but warned me that Evangeline seemed desperate and dangerous. The victim support network grew stronger as we realized Evangeline's ultimate pattern. She wasn't just trying to control or punish us. She was actively trying to trigger genuine mental health crises that would retroactively justify all her claims about our instability. Several victims had nearly succeeded in harming themselves under her pressure. Research into Evangeline's past revealed the pattern went back 15 years to college. Her roommate had suffered a complete breakdown after similar treatment and remained in psychiatric care. The system Evangeline used had been refined and perfected over decades of practice. I discovered Evangeline only directly controlled about 8 employees through blackmail and manipulation. The rest complied out of fear after witnessing her destroy others. Her power came from the threat of what she could do, not from genuine loyalty or respect. Digging deeper, I found Evangeline's master's thesis titled Leveraging Trauma Narratives for Corporate Advancement. Her academic advisor had called it ethically troubling but brilliant in his evaluation. She'd been studying how to weaponize vulnerability since graduate school. Marcus faced an ultimatum from Jenna to evict me from our apartment. When he refused, her extreme reaction made him suspicious. He realized he was being manipulated when she couldn't explain why my presence threatened her so much. He chose our friendship over her demands, and she moved out immediately, but not before trying to plant listening devices in our common areas. Sarah revealed why she'd been so supportive after weeks of observing my consistent behavior versus Evangeline's claims. Her own sister had been driven from the tech industry by a similar predator. She recognized the pattern and refused to let it happen again under her watch. I gained access to damaging information about Evangeline's own mental health history, but chose not to weaponize it. Maintaining ethical standards while under attack became my way of proving I was nothing like her. The high road was lonely but necessary. A confrontation at Evangeline's yoga class yielded unexpected results. I overheard her telling another student that she specifically targeted weak people who document everything because they were easy to discredit. Their thoroughness became evidence of obsession, their attention to detail proof of instability. The yoga instructor, who'd been recording for her own protection after sensing something off about Evangeline, shared the audio with me. Trevor, one of Evangeline's inner circle, decided to leave the company. Before departing, he shared recordings he'd secretly made of Evangeline coaching employees to fake panic attacks for authentic leadership demonstrations. He'd kept them as insurance, knowing she'd eventually turn on him too. 2 board members began quietly investigating after recognizing Evangeline's tactics from their own children's experiences in tech. They'd heard similar stories of destroyed careers and manufactured crises. Their investigation operated in secret to avoid alerting Evangeline. The pattern crystallized completely. Evangeline specifically hunted whistleblowers and documentarians, using their natural thoroughness against them. She called it evidence jujitsu, turning their strength into weakness by reframing documentation as obsession and attention to detail as paranoia. Victims pooled resources to hire Dr. Nathaniel Reeves, a forensic psychologist who specialized in corporate psychological abuse cases. His initial assessment confirmed what we'd suspected. Evangeline's methods matched matched those used by cults to discredit defectors who might expose them. I encountered Evangeline at a wine bar where she'd had too much to drink. Her guard down, she made a revealing comment about learning from my documentation habits. She admitted she'd studied how I gathered evidence and learned to create better narratives to counter any documentation. The admission was chilling in its calculated coldness. Sarah reinstated me fully after Connor's planted evidence was discovered on company servers. An IT audit revealed the extent of his infiltration into our systems. He'd been promised a promotion by Evangeline in exchange for his betrayal, but found himself unemployed when the scheme unraveled. Evangeline's influence began shrinking as employees realized her vulnerability was entirely performed. She'd never shared a single authentic moment of weakness, only carefully choreographed displays designed to manipulate others. The mask was slipping, and people were starting to see the calculating mind behind it. Dr. Reeves completed his analysis, identifying Evangeline's pattern as matching induced psychological illness tactics. These were techniques used by cults to create mental instability in critics, then point to that instability as evidence the person was always troubled. His report would become crucial evidence in what was to come. I helped Trevor secure a position at a competitor before Evangeline could destroy his career. In gratitude, he legally backed up files containing recordings of Evangeline discussing her methods. His documentation was admissible because he'd recorded in a one-party consent state and had been part of the conversations. 12 victims met in a hotel conference room, sharing recordings that revealed identical manipulation patterns across years and companies. The consistency was stunning. Evangeline used the same phrases, same tactics, same escalation timeline with each target. We weren't individuals to her, we were case studies in her system. Evangeline's desperation showed when she contacted Adult Protective Services, claiming mom showed signs of dementia and was being exploited by an unstable child. The investigation found no basis for the claims, but the process itself was traumatic for mom, who finally began to understand the scope of Evangeline's campaign. An IT security alert notified our CEO when Evangeline's credentials accessed my computer during a weekend. Security footage showed her at my workstation, but she claimed I'd asked her to check something. Without proof of unauthorized access, she faced no immediate consequences, but suspicions were growing. A tech blogger received an anonymous tip about the vulnerability vulture, a nickname that began spreading through industry whisper networks. Evangeline's reputation started cracking as more people recognized her patterns. She could no longer operate in complete darkness. Dr. Reeves's forensic report confirmed patterns of induced trauma across all victims. His expert framework provided the foundation for potential legal action. While criminal prosecution remained unlikely without physical threats, civil remedies were possible. The board meeting that would decide Evangeline's promotion to vice president was scheduled for the next morning. I faced a choice: remain silent and watch her gain power to hurt thousands, or go nuclear with the evidence I'd gathered. She was already celebrating, certain of her victory. A restaurant confrontation revealed Evangeline's origin story. Her father had institutionalized her mother using similar tactics, manufacturing evidence of instability to gain control. She'd learned from watching him destroy her mother, but instead of breaking the cycle, she'd perfected it. The revelation explained everything and nothing. The stakes became crystal clear. If Evangeline became VP, she'd implement her system company-wide. Training programs would teach her methods. Evaluation systems would reward manufactured vulnerability. Thousands of employees would face the same psychological torture we'd endured. I made my decision. That night, I sent comprehensive documentation to all board members with my name attached. No anonymous tips, no hidden sources. The package included recordings of Evangeline discussing her psychological pressure campaigns and testimonials from multiple victims. I wouldn't hide anymore. 6 board members realized their own employees had been victims of Evangeline's system. Emergency meetings were called for dawn. Corporate psychopath writes thesis on weaponizing vulnerability, then spends 15 years perfecting the art of making people question their sanity. That's taking publish or perish to terrifying new heights. She literally published her evil playbook first. The corporate machinery that had enabled her for so long finally began to turn against her. Trevor's files included a document titled Communication Strategies for Different Personality Types. Each type had specific manipulation tactics. I was listed as Case Study Number 12, the documentarian, with detailed notes on how to discredit evidence gatherers. She'd been studying me like a laboratory specimen. The board placed Evangeline on administrative leave pending investigation. She maintained she was helping people achieve authentic leadership through her methods. Her tears during the announcement seemed genuine for the first time, but the board remained unmoved. They'd seen too much evidence of calculated cruelty. Evangeline's final manipulation attempt claimed I'd been stalking her. She presented selectively edited evidence of my documentation efforts, trying to reframe investigation as obsession. But Dr. Chen's published paper provided a clear framework to distinguish between documentation and stalking. The claim collapsed under scrutiny. Connor's testimony to the board revealed the full extent of Evangeline's surveillance network. He broke down during the deposition, admitting she'd groomed him since his internship, promising career advancement in exchange for increasingly invasive actions. The board member's expressions hardened as he detailed how she'd taught him to plant keyloggers, access private calendars, and create backdoors into company systems. The evidence showed Evangeline's system was designed to create actual mental health crises she could then point to as justification. Her own notes, recovered from Trevor's files, contained phrases like induce instability through sustained pressure and document breakdown for future leverage. The board's legal counsel advised immediate action to limit corporate liability. With the documented pattern across multiple victims, our attorney filed a civil suit for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Criminal investigation remained unlikely without physical threats, but the civil case had teeth. Evangeline's own meticulous documentation became evidence against her. The industry began creating what they called the Evangeline Protocol, a warning system for psychological predators in leadership positions. Her name became a cautionary verb in HR circles. Companies started implementing psychological safety assessments specifically designed to catch her tactics early. Evangeline's lawsuit arrived at my workplace on Mom's birthday, served by a process server who made sure everyone in the office saw it happen. The timing wasn't coincidental. She knew exactly when to strike for maximum emotional impact. Mom finally understood the full scope of what I'd been facing when she saw the legal documents. The lawsuit forced me to relive every moment of trauma in depositions. Evangeline's lawyer used my therapy records against me, twisting every vulnerability into evidence of instability. Each session felt like being flayed alive while someone took notes. The legal strategy was clear: make the process so painful I'd settle just to make it stop. Some supporters distanced themselves when Evangeline released a recording of me saying I wanted to destroy her. The context had been completely removed. What I'd actually said was that I wanted to destroy her system of abuse, but the edited version made me sound vindictive and unstable. Several colleagues who'd been supportive suddenly found reasons to avoid me. Legal bills mounted faster than I could track them. Each deposition cost thousands. Each motion required responses. Each delay meant more fees. Evangeline offered to drop the suit if I'd publicly apologize and return to her control. She set the deadline for Mom's surgery date, knowing the financial pressure would be crushing. My decision petition to countersue transformed into a class action as 47 victims joined. Evangeline suddenly faced potential bankruptcy as damages multiplied. Her confident facade cracked when she realized her victims weren't isolated anymore. We'd formed a united front she couldn't break. Evangeline's attorney filed a motion to admit my therapy records as evidence. The judge limited the scope, but some deeply personal information became part of the court record. Details about childhood trauma, relationship struggles, and private fears were now accessible to anyone who requested the case files. The mediation at the law firm forced all victims to face Evangeline in a conference room. Security guards stood ready as tension filled the space like invisible smoke. She dressed as the vulnerable victim, soft colors and minimal makeup, playing a role even now. Her performance might have worked if we hadn't all seen behind the mask. Evangeline insisted she'd been teaching radical authenticity to help people advance their careers. When victims presented recordings of her laughing about breaking employees, her attorney's face went pale. The mediator, a retired judge, listened to audio of Evangeline coaching someone through faking a panic attack, her voice clinical as she explained optimal timing for maximum impact. The final revelation came when we discovered Evangeline had been taking detailed notes after her own therapy sessions, studying psychological manipulation techniques to use against others. Her therapist, bound by confidentiality, couldn't testify directly, but provided a sealed affidavit about concerning patterns observed before terminating treatment. The judge's expression shifted as he reviewed the sealed document. I faced a choice between accepting a settlement requiring silence or pursuing trial, knowing my personal medical history would become public record. The financial pressure was crushing, but silence meant Evangeline could do this again. Other victims made the same choice despite personal costs. We'd go to trial. Evangeline realized her own emails and documented strategies demonstrated a pattern of deliberate harm. Her confident facade cracked for the first time during a deposition when confronted with her own words about systematically dismantling targets. Genuine fear flickered across her face as she understood her meticulous documentation had become her downfall. Her attempt to relocate for a new opportunity abroad stalled when the potential employer searched her name online. The lawsuit news dominated search results. Professional doors that had always opened for her began slamming shut. She discovered what her victims had known for years. Reputation destruction was devastating. Evangeline's final manipulation attempt claimed I'd driven her to a breakdown. Her attorney presented medical records showing she'd sought psychiatric treatment, but her own journal entries, subpoenaed during discovery, showed years of planning similar campaigns. The victim narrative she'd tried to construct collapsed under the weight of her own evidence. The settlement negotiations dragged through multiple sessions. Evangeline fought every point, trying to maintain some control even in defeat. Her attorney grew increasingly frustrated as she rejected reasonable terms, insisting on provisions that would let her continue her leadership development work under a different name. Finally, facing bankruptcy and industry blacklisting, Evangeline accepted the settlement terms. She was banned from leadership roles at any company where victims worked, required to undergo therapy with a court-approved psychologist, and pay financial restitution to all victims. The agreement included non-disparagement clauses both ways, preventing her from continuing her campaigns. The parking lot confrontation after signing happened fast. Evangeline approached as I walked to my car, her mask completely gone. Her words came out in a hiss of pure venom, telling me I'd destroyed something beautiful, that she'd given people purpose and meaning through her methods. Her final words stuck like thorns. We were all still nothing without the identity she'd forced us to build in opposition to her. Companies across tech began implementing Evangeline's law, psychological safety protections, and mandatory reporting of emotional manipulation. HR departments created training specifically about weaponized vulnerability and manufactured authenticity. The industry was finally acknowledging that psychological predators could be as damaging as any other workplace hazard. 1 year later, the victims network received an alert. Evangeline had been caught running a similar scheme at a nonprofit focused on youth leadership. The board immediately terminated her when notified of her history. She'd lasted 3 months before her patterns emerged. The network now monitored job sites and professional platforms, warning organizations when she applied. Mom created a support group for families of workplace abuse victims. She'd nearly lost me to what she now understood was a sophisticated psychological attack. Her group met monthly at the community center, sharing resources and strategies for supporting loved ones facing workplace predators. She became an unexpected advocate, her grandmotherly appearance disarming people who might otherwise dismiss the seriousness of psychological workplace abuse. 2 years had passed when I found myself speaking at a conference on corporate psychological abuse. The audience included former victims now thriving in new roles, HR professionals taking detailed notes, and researchers studying the phenomenon. My presentation focused on recognition and prevention, sharing the patterns we'd identified through painful experience. In the back row, almost hidden in shadows, sat a familiar figure. Evangeline looked diminished, her previous commanding presence reduced to something smaller and harder. She was attending voluntarily, taking notes like any other participant. Whether she sought understanding of the damage she'd caused or was studying new tactics remained unclear. I concluded my presentation with the truth learned through survival. The most dangerous predators in corporate environments weren't always obvious. They spoke the language of wellness and authenticity while orchestrating systematic destruction. They used vulnerability as a weapon and empathy as a trap. The scars they left were invisible but real. The conference ended with networking and resource sharing. Survivors exchanged contact information and strategies. HR professionals asked detailed questions about early warning signs. Researchers discussed funding for longer-term studies. The conversation had finally started, even if it came too late for many of us. I drove home through familiar streets, past the coffee shop that had been my safe haven, past the office where everything had started. The ghost pepper hot sauce incident felt like a lifetime ago, a almost comedic beginning to something that had nearly destroyed me. But I'd survived, scarred but functional, surrounded by others who understood that some wounds never fully healed, only scarred over with wisdom and wariness. The support network continued monitoring and protecting. We'd learned that predators like Evangeline didn't change, they just adapted. Our vigilance was the price of preventing future victims. It wasn't the ending anyone would choose, but it was real and honest, and reflected the messy complexity of surviving psychological abuse in professional settings. My phone buzzed with a message from a new victim seeking help, someone in another city, another industry, facing the same systematic destruction. I responded with resources and support, knowing the cycle continued but no longer in darkness. We dragged this particular type of predator into the light, even if we couldn't eliminate them entirely. The story never really ended. It just evolved into something more complex and ongoing, a permanent awareness that professional environments could harbor sophisticated psychological predators. But we'd learned to recognize them, document them, and fight back. That knowledge, hard-won through collective trauma, was our gift to those who came after. Thanks for reading this story with me. It's been quite a journey watching someone turn trauma into protection for others.